I'm Sophia, and I'm going to be reading Frindle, Chapter 1. This story is by Andrew Clements. Nick. If you ask the kids and the teachers at Lincoln Elementary School to make 3 lists, all the really bad kids, all the really smart kids, and all the really good kids, Nick Allen would not be on any of them. Nick deserves a list all his own, and everyone knew it. Was Nick a troublemaker? Hard to say. One thing for sure, Nick Allen had plenty of ideas, and he knew what to do with them. One time in 3rd grade, Nick decided to turn Miss Deaver's room into a tropical island. What kid in New Hampshire isn't ready for a little summer in February? So, first he got everyone to make small palm trees out of green and brown construction paper and tape them into the corner of each desk. Miss Deaver has only been a teacher for about 6 months, and she was delighted. That's so cute! The next day, all the girls who wore flowers in their hair and all the boys who wore sunglasses and beach hats. Mrs. Deaver clapped her hands and said, "It's so colorful." The day after that, Nick turned the classroom up to about 90 degrees with a little screwdriver he had brought from home. All the kids changed into shorts and t-shirts with no shoes, and Mrs. Deaver left the room for a minute. Nick spread around 10 cups of fine white sand all over the classroom floor. Miss Deaver was surprised again just how creative her students could be, but the sand got tracked out the hallway, where Manny, the custodian, did not think it would be creative at all. Now he stomped right down to the office. The principal followed the trail of sand, and when he arrived, Mrs. Deaver was teaching the hula to some kids near the front of the room, and a tall, thin, t-shirtless boy with chestnut hair was just spiking a Nerf volleyball over a net made from 6 t-shirts tied together. The 3rd grade trip to the South Seas ended suddenly. But that didn't stop Nick from trying to liven things up. Lincoln Elementary needed a good jolt once in a while, and Nick was just the guy to deliver it. About a year later, Nick made the great blackbird discovery. One night, he learned on a TV show that the red-winged blackbirds give this high-pitched chirp when a hawk or something else danger comes. Because of the way sounds travels, the hunter birds can't tell where the high-pitched chirps is coming from. The next day, during silent reading, Nick glanced at his teacher, and he noticed that Mrs. Avery's nose was curved, kind of like the beak of the hawk. So Nick let out a high, squeaky blackbird peep. Peep! Mrs. Avery jerked her head from her book and looked around. She could tell who did it, so she just said, "Shh," to the whole class. A minute later, Nick did it again, louder. Peep! This time, there was a little giggle from the class, but Mrs. Avery pretended not to hear the sound, and about 15 seconds later, she slowed She slowly stood up and walked to the back of the classroom. Without taking his eyes off his book and without moving at all, Nick put his heart and south into the highest and most annoying chirp of all. Peep! Mrs. Avery pronounced. Janet Frisk, you stop that instant. Janet, who was sitting 4 rows away from Nick, promptly turned white, then brightened crimson. But it wasn't me, honest. There was a catch in Janet's voice, as if she might cry. Miss Avery knew she had mistaken and she apologized to Janet. Someone is asking for big trouble, said Mrs. Avery, looking more like a hawk every second. Nick kept reading, and he didn't make a peep. At lunchtime, Nick talked to Janet. He felt bad for Mrs. Avery had pounced on her. Janet lived in Nick's neighborhood, and sometimes they played together. She was a good baseball. She was good at baseball, and she was better at soccer than most of the kids in the whole school. Boys or girls, Nick said, "Hey, Janet, I'm sorry you got yelled at during class. During reading. It was my fault. I was the one who made the sound." "You did?" said Janet. "But how come Mrs. Avery thought it was me?" So Nick told her about the blackbirds, and Janet thought it was pretty interesting. Then she tried making a peep or two, and Janet's chirps were even higher and squeakier than Nick's. She promised to keep everything a secret for the rest of Nick's 4th grade year, at least once a week. Mrs. Avery heard a loud peep from somewhere in her classroom. Sometimes there was a high-pitched chirp, and sometimes there's a very high-pitched chirp. Mrs. Avery never figured out who was making the noise, and gradually she trained herself to ignore it. But she still looked like a hawk. To Nick, the whole thing was just one long and successful science experiment, and Janet Fisk enjoyed it too.